first session this morning, Design Agile Team for Success, Reduce Dependencies, and Optimize Delivery by Leland, Newsom. We'll have 10 minutes for Q&A at the end of the session, and with that, I'll hand it over to Leland.
All right, thanks. So dependencies, right? One of the silent killers for Agile. I'm sure you've seen it. It's funny because even when Max was talking earlier today, and even in the keynote, I wanted to change some of my slides. But I have to, I work in a really regulated industry, so I have to get compliance approval before I do anything, so I couldn't change slides. So I might wing a little bit and change in my discussion just a little bit inside of it. Recently, this talk actually came out from meeting up with Max for lunch one day. We were talking about dependencies and how much of a problem they are. And I was doing some metrics, and we were looking at the metrics and why we weren't meeting certain metrics in there. And every reason inside of it said dependencies. And so kind of where this one came from. So I'm Leland Newsom. I've been around a while for Agile Austin. I run the Agile at Scale SIG. Been doing that SIG since 2016. My first speaking was actually in 2014 with Agile Austin, so that was my first one. And I've spoken at this conference now for many years, so that's me. I've been around Agile since 2004. Lean was really where I got my start. So doing Lean and XP, moved into Scrum, of course, in about 2007, and just kind of from there. So I've been an Agile coach, directly Agile coach for 10 years. Before that, I was within software development. So moved up through development from developer to development manager to director, and then actually moved over to Agile coaching. I mentioned I'm in a regulated environment, so you see the disclaimer, right? These are my opinions. It doesn't necessarily reflect the views of my employer. In fact, one of the things I'll talk about in here was something my boss and I don't necessarily agree on either, and so it's really around those. This was supposed to be a poll, so I'll just skip the poll for now. Just kind of curious inside of here, who has problems with dependencies? So most of the room, cool. All right, so this, a lot of places will have dependencies, and this cartoon fits it just right. This one's more targeted towards safe, where they're doing PI planning, the RTE is there, they're very excited about their first time doing PI planning, they visualize their dependencies, and you can see the image down at the bottom. That's the dependencies everywhere on there, they're all over the place. They just really have a problem with dependencies. It's not just a cartoon. This was a photo I took in 2017. So this was a place I was coaching, and they were using SAFe, and that was their dependencies. Most of the dependencies on the right are the off the train. So their Agile release train was on the left, and they had a lot of dependencies on the right. The RTE, their main goal, every PI, whenever I came in there, was actually just managing dependencies. That was a full-time job of the RTE, managing those dependencies. Again, this was in 2017, and we're still talking dependencies today. In fact, the State of Agile report highlights where Agile struggles. And you can see inside of here, the ones I highlighted are siloed teams cause delays on deliveries and lack of visibilities on dependencies. 17 years of the State of Agile report, and those have been there pretty much the entire time. So we've continued to struggle with dependencies and still had trouble with those dependencies. Over on the right side, I put the top types of dependencies, and that was ChatGPT output. So you can see there's multiple types of dependencies. So we'll talk a little bit more about those as we go. So dependencies. Think about if you're going to dinner and you can't be seated unless everyone's there, right? That's a form of a dependency, right? Of the other person getting there. So what's the probability of all being there on time? Just think mathematical. Don't think about people, but you're all coming from different sides of Austin. You're gonna meet in downtown Austin for dinner. What's the probability you're gonna be there on time with 4 people? Anyone wanna take a guess on that? 0? What's that? 3%? 1 out of 16 chances. Every time you remove a dependency, you double your chance of success. So think about that. Every time you remove a dependency, you double your chance of success. And so we start thinking about, why do we have dependencies, right? The Scrum Guide says it. Have all the skills necessary to create value each sprint. The team should be large enough to complete significant work, but it also says it's typically 10 or fewer. Amazon, Jeff Bezos has said, if you can't feed a team with 2 pizzas, it's too large of a team. So we start looking at those small teams, that law of small teams, right? Are we able to get enough inside the teams to be able to deliver without dependencies? So is that something, it's the law of small teams that we all follow, right? The Scrum Guide used to say 7 plus or minus 2. The first Scrum Guide said 7 plus or minus 2. And is that enough people in the teams? And I know we all coach that direction, but is that really what we should be doing? So I actually Googled for this talk, where did the law of small teams come from? And it come from what I found, right? It may or may not be right, but what I found was in 1913, the Ringelmann effect. It was a social psychology experiment where they were asking people to pull a rock, put a rope around the rock and pull on it. And what they found was, the smaller the team, the more people did it. So if you had one person, they're giving all their effort, and then as you added more, the less effort they gave. And so their experiment suggested that we had a team of 7 plus or minus 2. The original Scrum Guide said 7 plus or minus 2, right? So coming from a 1913 experiment on physically moving a big boulder. And so as we look at that, what was the management theory happening in 2013? It was the Taylorism, right? The principles of scientific management that had just come out 2 years earlier from Frederick Taylor, right? Very command and control. You specialized work. You centralized decision-making. The manager was in charge. Extrinsic motivation, right? We're gonna pay you more if you produce more. Little flexibility, top-down communication, no feedback loops. The Agile Manifesto, and there's been plenty of conferences that talked about moving away from Taylorism style of management, moving into more of that collaborative, adaptive, decentralizing decision-making. And so we've adopted the law of small teams from the same time that it's moving away from a management theory that we want to move away from, right? And so we start looking at what's the data say. This data was 2014. Larry Matroni did some data. He worked at Rowley, had data from 10,000 teams to say, how do we get performance? And so if you look at the data, and we'll go into into the first part, quality and responsiveness was about the same. Productivity was a little less, but predictability was a little higher. So what are you optimizing for on the team sizes? His data says if you had a large team and it was working fine, no reason to make it smaller. But if dependencies are an issue, it's okay to go a little bit larger. And that the fact that larger teams meant fewer teams, so you're now looking at the full system performance, not just the team performance. So really taking that systemic view and system thinking view of doing system performance is greater than team performance. Troy McGinnis then took the same data 10 years ago at Agile 2015 and broke it into the individual ones. And on the top left, you can see productivity. Productivity is higher on smaller teams, right? You don't have as long of meetings, you don't have as lot of discussions, you're able to be heads down and work on it. So smaller teams are great for productivity. Predictability, though, was better for the 9 to 15 person teams. And so if you look at that, are you more interested in being predictable or individual productivity? So you have to think about what you're wanting to optimize on. And then at the bottom, responsiveness and quality are about equal. It's what the data says, right? So making sure you understand, why are we optimizing, what are we optimizing for? So we all know the risk of large teams, right? It draws really nice, pretty pictures on the screen if you ask it to draw these connections. But the larger the team, the more people you have, the more communication paths, the more connection inside of it. So a large team, if you have an 18-person team, it's not on here, but an 18-person team has 153 connections, right? That's a lot of connections between the team that you have to deal with at daily stand-up, at sprint planning, just a lot of things happening inside of that. And so we want to make sure we're doing that. And a lot of times the larger teams tend to split into two smaller sub-teams. If that happens, it probably should be two teams. So we need to understand the risk if we're going to look at larger teams. And I'm not actually up here saying we should go to larger teams as a generic rule. I'm more saying be open to experimentation, right? Don't be rigid in your team sizes. Some more recent data than those is some work that Pratik Singh did recently, and he posted it out on Medium, so you can go read that. That in reality, all those connections aren't active at any one time. In reality, only a few connections are active at any time, and the number of paths are more closely related to the amount of WIP that the team has started. So how much work is in progress. And so he talks about team sizes of 25 people. Like, he's had good experiences with teams of 25 people. I've personally never gone that large. I tend to be around that 15 people size. So I'm just saying this is some more recent thought. And so the main thing is the bold statement on the screen: don't sacrifice business agility to follow a rigid guideline about team size. Be open to experimentation. From there, I want to shift a little bit into team topologies. Great book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Team topologies, it provides a structured approach to team design, focuses on team interactions, reducing cognitive load on the teams, but it's really about creating high-performing, fast-moving, agile organizations, and they do it through certain team types. Now, they do recommend small teams, so I know I just said be open to experimentation with larger teams, but in this book they do really encourage more smaller teams. So I want to call that out. So it's a blend. Again, I want to stress the experimentation, not being rigid in one way, right? Open to try new things. So team topologies defines 4 team structures. Their goal is autonomous, high-performing teams. So they're really looking at teams who can deliver on their own. At the top, you see the streamline teams. Those deliver value end to end. They should be the build and run it teams. They should have everything within those teams to actually build, run, everything needed within those teams. Below it, you have enabling teams. They're helping provide skills, helping teach the things, helping them with, for example, their DevOps pipeline. Here's how you get into that, and teaching that to the streamline teams. Complicated subsystem teams are the ones that require deep experience, deep knowledge, and then the platform teams, providing that self-service infrastructure to the teams. And the platform teams is the one, platform and the complicated subsystem really help remove that cognitive load off of the streamline team, so helping make their job a lot easier. So you can see, I kind of hit these already, but stream, they're trying to minimize dependencies because they want to own the entire work on the whole flow. So we want to make sure we're doing that. Platform team, again, reusable tools, enabling teams, helping upskill, and complicated subsystem teams are handling specialized work, security, authentication, whatever that may be inside of it. And then you get into the 3 core interaction modes. Collaboration, working together for a defined time. So what's interesting about these different ones here, like collaboration, I actually wrote it down just a few minutes ago to talk more about collaboration. Collaboration, a lot of companies spend money. I mean, I was a consultant for years and going in and helping teams do stuff like whether it was SAFe or Scrum or Kanban, whatever they wanted, it was mostly here's what they're bringing you in for. But they had a collaboration problem. 90% of my time I was spent on how do I improve collaboration inside the organization. But inside of here, the collaboration, this one, you're defining it. We're working together for some period of time. We're doing this together to complete this goal. So we're defining what those rules are. And so team topologies really wants you to define what it is and have it a more defined interaction period. The X as a service, where one team produces something, one team consumes it, the typical as a service, is actually where they want you to get for more of the longer term. That's what their concepts say, get to that as the end. And then facilitating, we're gonna help, we're gonna mentor your team, we're gonna help you grow in that area. And if you're doing anything outside those three, they say that could be a potential red flag or whatever you wanna call it that you need to inspect. So if you have a process where, let's say you're in a large organization that has 2 different Agile release trains, and they're constantly having to write some kind of ticket, some input system to throw it over to the other art for them to deliver it, and there's no collaboration, that could be a red flag, right? I've seen that at other places where they had those kind of ticketing system, and they talked a lot about their work input system. And it was really throwing it over. And so we should have tried to get more into a collaboration mode. How do we do this together instead of a request, order giver, order receiver model, right? And so really that's one of the key things on the team topologies is getting into that mode. Team topologies, they say it's, dependencies, that we're trying to reduce the dependencies, but it's really about managing them, intentionally managing them. And so, manage them, start with collaboration, evolve to the X as a service, really get into structured interaction modes, teams with clear APIs, teams with clear responsibilities, giving those purpose-driven teams, making the teams more stable, making them more stream-aligned so that they can own everything from front to end. So really getting into a more structured approach into it. So some of the core ideas from team topologies are the ones on the screen. It's about flow, right? That we're looking at how do we get flow. Pretty much anything that I do is around flow. My metrics are flow-based. When I coach, it's about flow. How do we make sure we have smooth flow from one to the other? High trust, right? High psychological safety. That's non-negotiable. That probably should have been number 1, but I took it right from their website in the order they have it. I think high trust, that's your starter. Without it, you can't do anything. Keeping teams together long term. Don't build them up, tear them down, change them. Don't do that. Let them go through the forming, storming, norming, performing. Let them get to performing and stay there inside of it. Respecting cognitive limits, that's your WIP limits mostly, right? So don't overload teams. Don't have them doing a lot of complex things together. Respect that. Small changes. Making things small, make them safe to fail experiments, right? We've heard that numerous times as well. Connecting teams directly to customers. Where I'm working right now, a lot of my customers are internal, so it's easy to directly work with customers. But I have been at a place where even our iteration review, we were able to bring customers in and look at what we were producing. Was very powerful, actually, in that scenario, the developers to be able to show what they did to the customer and get direct feedback was very powerful. So connecting as much to the customer as possible. We live in a complex world, we shouldn't fight it. Continuous discovery, and then finally that eliminating team dependencies. That's the only place that I've seen actually in the team topologies where they said eliminate. Usually they say do it in a manage control way for dependencies, eventually teaching the stream-aligned teams to handle things on their own. The core ideas, right? I've hit a couple of them, the team types, the interaction modes, the cognitive load I hit just a little bit. the thinnest viable platform. So I said have a platform team. What we don't want is this big heavyweight platform that creates extra dependencies on the platform team. So trying to have something thin that the platform team is you're enabling the streamline teams inside of it. Flexible team boundaries. So we start with team boundaries. I own this, you own that, and we understand where we are. We're working together in collaboration. That shouldn't always be permanent, right? They should be flexible, and we have those conversations when new things come up and maybe have to adjust them. And then a continuous adaptation. One thing that team topologies is not on these slides, and I'm not hitting it a lot, is they do talk about the Conway's law and the reverse Conway law method for creating your teams. And so structuring based off of how it should flow instead of the typical hierarchy model inside of it. So it's really about empowering teams, eliminating friction, and architecting for flow. So moving to self-service, clear ownership, removing handoffs, look at those high friction, high frequency dependencies. That image that I showed that I took of dependencies, I want to say it was a PI later. We had one where one team had probably 5 or 6 strings just to the same team on the other side. And so we asked, why is that the case? And they had 2 people. Can't even remember. I know one of them's name was Robert, so Bob, and I can't remember the other guy's name, were the only 2 who knew how to do a certain task. And so Bob would start with something, have to hand it off to the other person, and then the other person would do a little work and hand it back to Bob. And we had it right there on the screen and asked the manager, I was like, why can't they be on the same team together? And they were like, well, they can. There's no reason for that. And so it was easy to put them on a team, and we removed 6 strings from the wall, right? Right there at that PI planning, and again, I'm not trying to promote necessarily safe, but that was the experience that it was in. And that was at the leadership sync at the end of day 1 of PI planning, that we changed those 2 teams and took the dependencies right off the wall that day. So really look at that clear ownership and reducing those high friction, high frequency dependencies. We gave them clear responsibilities. You own this. Take it front to end. And then the platform team, the enablement team, the complicated subsystem, leverage them, right? Leverage them to have lower cognitive load on the Stream-Alive teams, but also, their specialty, so they're able to do things. And it is a form of dependency because they're still going to need to do things before you do it, but again, it's managed and it's controlled. And I think I'm actually going to finish earlier and have more time. I have a couple of extra slides we can do too, but my main part of my talk is around small teams, experimenting with those, find ways, visualize your dependencies, find ways to remove those, get them more stream-aligned, reducing those team handoffs, increase the delivery speed, using the platform teams to support, not block, having a clear interaction mode, strategic team design, right? So making sure you're designing those teams and paying attention to how the teams interact. I'm going to skip a couple of slides. So here's the example that I use. It's actually fairly similar. That was the company with all the dependencies fit this model, by the way. It was in a healthcare insurance company in their grievances and appeals. So if you ever seen any of the SAFE material, they talk about operational value streams and development value streams. So I put them on the screen here. But you can see things flow on operational value stream from someone has a grievance or they have an appeal, they enter it in a system. So you have an intake, you have your case triage, you collect some documents, they review them, right, all the way through. And again, large companies that are using SAFE will have an Agile release train around case management. And so that case management team will do some work. And so if you apply team topologies in this model, you end up with something like on the screen here. So you have your grievances and appeal value stream. You have your case management art. You might have a policy review art. You'll have a compliance reporting one. So they're handling those things, right? They're taking them from front to end. Somewhere else, right, it's healthcare, they're going to have multiple claims inside their value streams. And so there might be a whole different value stream around claims and intake. But you have things like your fraud, your risk, fraud detection, identity, access management, enterprise data services, whatever. Those become your complicated subsystem teams, the specialties inside of it. Your platform, you have multiple ones around audit logging, customer identification, customer notification, compliance, automation. All of those things may be needed, but you don't want your streamline teams building those, right? They can be built from a platform. They can be reused. And then you have your technology enablement, your DevOps, your data management, your data analytics, your AI teams, all of those inside of the technology enablement teams. And so you can build this kind of structure pretty easily, and everyone can go through PI planning together and have that ART objective that I put here on the screen of improve resolution time for member grievances and appeals by 25%. And now you can see the intake and routing team, they have their own objective around automating intake form classification and reducing manual triage by 50%. The workflow engine, they're going to add some escalation logic inside of it. The document processing, they're going to do stuff, but they own those. They're able to meet that one objective, and everyone owns a piece of it themselves without saying, I need you to do work so that I can do work. So let's go back. References, again, I'm give some references here, and I have plenty of time for Q&A inside of this one. So, any questions? Yes. Mm-hmm. Right.
Focus more on whatever the delivery is. Oh, got the microphone here. So, but yeah, they focus more on here's what we want to deliver as a team versus being aligned around an outcome. So, what have you found in working with organizations to help them make that transition?
So in this example, I did give you had the microphone for the question, but just for the people on remotely, right? The question is, a lot of times inside the organizations are focused on the team, not on the bigger objective. And so how do we get to that bigger objective? So with safe ones, I'm going to say it's fairly easy to say the RTE, pull together all of those objectives from the individual teams, produce an ART objective. That was what was on the screen, right? I've seen other ways that are more fun. I have a friend that he does this where he's at, where he takes the concept that Jeff Bezos does at Amazon of producing the release kind of notes or the press release ahead of time. And so he actually takes that with product management, and they produce the press release of if this is a successful PI, here's what you can expect to have, right? Where it talks about the customers, here's the impact to the customer, here's the impact to the business. So you could take approaches like that, or you could just say, RTE, roll this up into the objectives. What are the outcomes? What do we really get out of it? And I even do that with the teams on their objectives, try to make them more outcome focused. Why does this matter? Not what is the output. Your goal isn't to do X number of features. Your goal is to provide some business value, write them in that direction. And so I spend time with teams actually about midway through a PI that I'll say, now that you know something more that you knew on that day, what's the best, let's rewrite these. And so kind of try to coach them through that. So they've had 2 to 4 weeks of doing work and say, now let's rewrite these in an outcome-oriented way. We don't replace theirs. We're just doing it for improvement so next time they get better. So that's one of the main ways I do it is let's take what we've done before, let's learn and improve from it so next time we can get better.
All right, Leland, we got an online question. Can you go back to the reference slides?
And by the way, Team Topologies has an academy. I'm not selling their product or anything. I don't know how much it costs, but they have even videos that you can pay for a 3-hour overview of team topologies.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So my question is on the dependency management.
Okay.
Not in this role. I'm from Comptroller of Public Accounts, State of Texas. In my previous role as an RTE, I used to spend most of my time managing dependencies. The biggest challenge that we had was, or maybe all companies do experience this, is like, I wouldn't call it competing priorities, but my priority is not the priority of another team, which is on the train.
Yeah.
And two, whether it is upstream or downstream, for the dependent team number 2 to deliver, we have to reach a certain stage from team 1. Only then they can pick up work. That is one. And the second question is like, in fact, I have 3 questions. I'll put all the questions. Okay. The second question is like, teams are more task-oriented as to who should do this and who should do this, instead of focusing on the flow. These are challenges. And my question number 3 is, you showed a flow from intake to decision. What is the timeline you propose? Tentative timeline. I know it can be different for different projects of various complexities, but a recommended timeline from intake to decision before we get it to take it onto a train, or how do we do that?
Okay.
Single isolated teams delivering cross-functional dependencies, competing priorities, everything is understood. But the biggest challenge from my experience, have seen is like right at the planning stage, and your priority will become my priority only when you deliver me this. Unless, even if I'm on the same train working towards the same objective, I cannot do nothing because your output is not ready for me to start working on that. I mean,
Right.
it's a lot of questions.
Yeah, so let me hit the one about the dependencies will have a different priority for one team versus the other. That's actually a very common, like, I'm working on this. A lot of times you'll see, let's say more the streamline team using team topologies language. They're focused on delivering something and they need something from a back-end team or one that's not streamlined. Let's say the complicated subsystem. But the complicated subsystem team they could have a different priority. Maybe they have some security initiative that is their top thing, that they need to make all of their APIs more secure so they can't modify an API, right? So a very common thing, right? That takes us into a different, and at least where I talk about that one, a lot more about the upstream Kanban, what's coming through and how those things flow inside of it. And so having that whole upstream Kanban, these are the things we're gonna have, these are the things that are gonna have conflicts with each other. A lot more detail in there than I would this one, but establishing even that flow of what are the things gonna come in our pipeline next, and how those align. Is kind of where I tend to focus on that. And I could go more in detail on upstream Kanban if you want to go into that, but really how that flows inside of there. Let's see, what was the second one? Intake to decision. I'll go back to that slide. So this one, from all the way from the left, all the way from intake, decision's about halfway inside of it. So that one's a lot more around like the SLAs, right? If a customer is, in this case, healthcare, if you're appealing a decision or filing a grievance, we should have we'll get back to you by this amount of time. So really, how do we, I'm not going to say how, but that should be one of the key things we're measuring, right? Again, very flow-based, very much the lead time from the customer all the way to the end. We should know what that time is, and we should be able to pay attention to that time, and we should use regular techniques like looking at how long these decisions have been out there. In fact, that's why I actually put that on one of these about having, automating it to reduce it, scale the decision engine to handle 2 times the current amount of time, add escalation logic based on time and state, work item age. I know there's a couple out here that's worked with me before. When we're looking at the amount of time, work item age, I pay a lot of attention to. How long has this one been open? How long has it been out there? And so the same concepts of flow I would apply on that same, on this same one. But I would understand, what is our normal lead time? If our average lead time is 30 days and someone's at 21 days, they're 70%, there, right? So how far along are we? Are we where we should be at this stage, and paying attention to that, really looking at that inside of there? And you had one more. Oh, focus more on task, yeah. So that's just generally the very big fan of pair programming. I guess they call it ensemble programming, everyone getting together. If y'all hadn't heard, they removed mob programming, calling it ensemble programming. It's a language thing, right? Ensemble sounds nicer than mob, so we switched our language. We want to use better language. So doing things together, looking at whole ownership. How do we own that? Together as a team. So let's get together, let's own it together as a team. And that's really about changing the hearts and minds, right? You have to get into that first. And that's that culture. What are you willing to accept, and what are you rewarding, right? So if you think about any culture changing, if you're accepting them working on task, you're going to have a task-based team. If you're rewarding them on tasks, you're still going to have a task-based team. But if you're rewarding them off of teamwork and working together, you're going to have more teamwork working together. So it's about building that culture. So a lot of culture shaping goes into that. Okay. What other questions?
Any other questions online?
All right, well, I guess if there's no questions, y'all can catch me. I'm always willing to talk. I will back up to my original slide with my LinkedIn on it. I'm not that active on LinkedIn as far as posting stuff as I probably should be. Mostly, again, I'm working a fairly regulated, so I sometimes have to be careful what I post, so I don't post a whole lot. But I'm always available. Reach out to me. I love having these conversations. I do run the Agile at Scale SIG here, so if you're interested in more topics around Agile and large environments, it's a great SIG to come to. We also suggest topics there. I bring in speakers. It's actually pretty easy to find speakers since we're all remote on the SIG, so it's if you have topics you're interested in, let me know, and I will try to pull them in as well. In fact, I think next month we have their speaker is going to talk more deeply about team topologies. So if you want to learn more, I believe that's Marshall's talk is going to be deeper into team topologies.
Thanks, Leland. Great topics. I heard a rumor there's coffee still available, so go rush out and get you some, and we'll see you in the next session.